You mentioned that Archie was part of Marxist organizations like the Unity Movement. So I'm curious to know, would you consider him to be a Marxist, or would you say that he broke from Marxism intellectually and politically, or did he still retain a lot of those roots?
And can I add to that before you answer? Can I add to that? So one of the things about Archie, I think, and you sort of when you told his biography that came out, is this sort of idea. You know, in the setup, we said people think of him as kind of like marginal, alone, but we know that he's heavily, you know, outside South Africa, which is, you know, isolated, apartheid and so on. He's in Codesria. He is. If you go to a Codesria meeting, Archie Majefe, he gets a lot of love. Like, you know, all the people in Senegal, Olokoshi, Mamdani, like, you know, when they were alive, Tandika Mkandawire, if you talk to those guys, they appreciate it, they honored Archie. So my question to you on that is this, that's the side of, and this goes to the politics of Archie, I suppose. And somebody in the questions asked about sort of somebody like a Ben Magubani, where, of course, you said like Archie's thing was like, I need to break with this idea that like me as an intellectual and my politics are these separate things. Where do you say Archie in relation to like some of the debates that are happening about South Africa, but also on the continent? You have these other South African academics that are also like Bernard Magubani, etc., and so on. So in your answer about Archie's politics and Archie as a Marxist, can you also answer that question that one of the viewers was asking?
Yes. The most important thing about Archie is that, and I just last week I presented a paper here in my department in which I compare and contrast Archie and Samir Amin. For me, Archie remained a Marxist, but the thing about Archie is that he was not a crude Marxist who was content with regurgitating slogans and he didn't apply theory. He wanted to build theory and contribute to Marxist theory primarily. So why he admired, for example, people like Lenin and Mao Zedong as theorists, precisely because they brought to bear the concrete realities of their respective countries to bear on Marxist theory. And so, yes, he remained a Marxist, but he was alert to the fact that there would be instances here in Africa which contrast dramatically with some of the closely held views in Marxist theory. I mean, he and Samir Amin, for example, when they study, especially East Africa, they talk about the concept of a tributary mode of production, whereas other Marxists wanted to study pre-colonial Africa as a feudal society. And he was saying the question of land as property did not hold in that area of the African continent. The way in which people were exploited was such that they were exploited through paying dues and tributes to the kings and chiefs and other village elders, rather than being land-bound in the manner of a feudal society. And so I think the difference between Archie and Bernard Magubane, who's another intellectual hero of mine, is that I mean, without being unfair on Ben, but if you take their collection of essays, especially on revolutionary theory and South African struggles. So Ben Magubane has a book, for example, a collection of essays which came out, I think, in 1989 or 1987, called From Soweto to Utenhage. So I think the fundamental biographical difference is that they came from two different political traditions. Ben was ANC through and through. Archie was unity movement. But the interesting thing about Ben is that although he was ANC, I don't think he joined SACP, although he was a Marxist. But he continued to use and defend ANC, SACP theories. For example, this idea of South Africa being a colony of a special type or being a case of internal colonialism. Mafeje argued that this deviates from class analysis, partly because the idea of colonialism is externally imposed, rather than being the idea of it being internal is a self-contradiction. But the most important thing is that there was nothing unique about South Africa in that case, in any case. I mean, you can compare South Africa with other parts of Southern Africa and other parts of East Africa, and also even with the US in that way. And so he referred to South Africa, and I think this is close to Cedric's concept, although not exactly the same. He referred to South Africa as a case of racial oppression in the age of imperialism. Now, this is a direct quote from an article he wrote, which was published in 1986. It's entitled "South Africa, the Dynamics of a Beleaguered State." It was published in a journal called Journal of African Political Economy. And so, although he and Makubane came from different political traditions, Archie, in his collection of essays, which is entitled "In Search of an Alternative," he was quite critical of the unity movement. He was prepared to criticize his own movement, but and therefore, in some cases, abandoned some of the unity movement's theoretical and ideological positions. And that's something that Ben Makubane, as far as I'm concerned, was not prepared to do. He was an ANC cadre through and through. And so I think, for me, the lesson to be learned, I think, from Mafeje, especially in his political work, he was faithful to ideas, ideology, and principle rather than institutions and organizations. And he was prepared to be a lone ranger in that way.